Hello and welcome back to Breaking Ground on iPropertyRadio with myself, Carol Tallon, the show where we chat to industry experts to get a view of what's happening on the ground and new trends emerging within the construction industry. The show is brought to you in partnership with Place Engage, the data-driven platform for more successful public consultation and community engagement for your next development project. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Niall Morrissey, CEO of the Housing Infrastructure Services Company. Niall, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Karen. It's great to have the opportunity to talk to you.
Niall, it's always a good thing for me. I always feel that we're living up to our industry mandate when people contact me and say, have you heard about this company? You should interview this chap for your show. It makes me believe that we're living up to our industry mandate when the industry is telling us news that's happening on the ground. And the Housing Infrastructure Services Company certainly has the potential to be a real game changer in terms of unlocking the delivery of homes. So you might just talk us through the core offering of the Housing Infrastructure Services Company, or HISCo.
Yeah, well, HISCo was established with the sole objective of delivering infrastructure that is holding up residential development and delivery of residential development and speeding up of residential development is our core objective. I suppose just to start from the beginning, our shareholding partners are kind of an unusual collaboration. So what you have there is Cork County Council and the Ireland Strategic Investment Fund, which is managed by the NTMA. They started a conversation a number of years ago, focused purely on why are we not seeing, activity ramping up on residential development sites, despite the fact that they were seeing planning approvals going through at that time. And I suppose that there are many factors holding up residential development, but the one they decided to focus on is infrastructure and infrastructure challenges. So hence, they put HISCo together, and I joined them at the beginning of 2020 as chief executive. So the service we provide is quite simple. We can provide either on-site or off-site infrastructure. So first and foremost, just to keep it simple, let's just focus on-site infrastructure for a moment. So where we have a few projects underway at the moment whereby we are delivering all the services outside the garden gate, as I like to refer to them. So your footpaths, your public lighting, your foul sewer, your stormwater, everything is up for consideration, including all your development contribution payments, maybe to your connection charges to Irish Water. All of that is up for discussion, whereby HISCo can come in and deliver and physically deliver all of those. So we engage a contractor to deliver those services for the developer on the back of a legal agreement whereby we've agreed the costs and the overall costs, which includes, your consulting engineer or QS or wherever other professions are required. We then divide that cost over the number of units involved. And the unique element of our service then is we only charge you when you sell the unit. So if we, for argument's sake, if it's 15,000 a unit, you only pay 15,000 when the first house is sold or first lease. But let's just focus on selling, because it's predominantly the main thing that happens. So it gives the developer a cash flow break in that particular example, whereby we've gone in and put in 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, depending on the complexity of the project. We're putting that in day one of the first 9, 12, 18 months of the project. The developer then gets on with construction of houses and sale of those houses, and then only on sale of those houses are they paying HISCo the fee payable, whether it's the 14, 15,000, whatever the fee we've agreed at the start. So in that particular instance, we're delivering on-site infrastructure, we're giving a cash flow break to the developer, allowing them to get on with construction. And in some cases, not all, that allows them to avoid having to bring in senior lending on site. But in most cases, they will have to bring in senior lending, and that's fine too. So that's an example of on-site infrastructure projects.
Niall, before you move on to off-site infrastructure, you might just explain what was happening before HISCo. How was this type of infrastructure being paid for?
Well, I suppose in terms of a developer typically would have to go out and find a combination of their own equity and senior lending to deliver the particular project, and therefore they were on then a fixed term repayments plan, we'll say, an agreement with their senior lender. So it would be very much defined in terms of the a timeline we define when they'd have to be paid. Whereas with HISCo, it's until you sell that unit. So we're with you until the day you sell your very last unit. We've no fixed term. There's no actual term involved at all here. So in some projects we're dealing with, that could be 7, 8, 9 years time before the final unit is actually sold. So it very much gives you the peace of mind of knowing you don't have to come up with cash in advance of income accruing to you through the sale of units.
Has there been, I assume there has been some sort of a costing model done to compare the cost of working with HISCo as opposed to the alternative, say, for a standard development site?
I suppose, yeah, we've looked at our own cost base, and I suppose first and foremost to explain how our costs are made up. So when HISCo enters a project, we borrow that money from the Ireland Strategic Investment Fund. Okay, so HISCo has a loan to service, okay, separately to the developer. Other than that, we're adding on a small contribution to our overheads, and there's a small profit for the shareholders, because the entity is set up as a private limited company, so we must be a going concern. The two shareholders are not in this to make huge numbers of amount of profits. It is a vehicle to assist the developer. So we borrow the money. That allows me to pay the bills on a monthly basis. I'm paying the contractor at the end of each month. I'm paying the professionals at the end of each month in the normal way anyone would. And I suppose we've done our own analysis in terms of where we compare with other lending around the market. So I can't disclose what our interest rate agreed with ISIF is, but I can say to you that we are coming in somewhere around, we are a little bit dearer than the high street banks, but we're not as dear as some of the other funding mechanisms out there. We kind of come in there in tier 2. If you say there was 3 levels of lending, we're in around tier 2. So we're fairly reasonable in terms of cost. And bearing in mind we've a huge risk to take, and that we are with you till the very last unit is sold. So we have to balance that in terms of where we come into the market, in terms of the risk we're taking versus the cost we're charging. Okay,
thanks for breaking that down. You might then just talk us through maybe the off-site infrastructure.
So, absolutely, and this is where I think HISCo will have a much greater impact, because there are numerous examples throughout the country whereby large pieces of infrastructure are holding up several developers. So you have a multitude of developers. So I'll give you an example where we have started construction of a ring road in Drogheda, north of Drogheda. So in that situation, there are a number of landowners up there who either could not come into planning or were conditioned that they could not start their planning permissions until this particular piece of road was underway. So the Louth County Council 15 years ago went about getting their Part 8 approval in place, went about getting their compulsory purchase order sorted out, so they had secured the lands. But since then, they've tried, but were unsuccessful in securing any state funding to deliver that piece of infrastructure. So in our case now, we have contracted with 2 developers, Lorcan Green and Ballymckenny Developments Limited and Joe Riley's Castletorn, who between them will deliver 1,300 units. And we've agreed the overall cost of construction, like I explained previously. We are now have divided that back down into a price per unit, exactly the same model, and they only pay us the price per unit as each house is sold. But that has allowed HISCo to go out to the market, and we've employed Clonmel Enterprises to construct the road. We have a team of 5 different professionals who are overseeing the project for us, from archaeologists to ecologists to consulting engineers, and we've now unlocked that piece of infrastructure. So, yes, the 2 developers HISCo is contracted with are now building. They've started already, but it also allowed other developers to now come in and get their planning permissions underway, get them approved, and start building. So we've done a calculation that ultimately it will free up to 5,000 units north of Drogheda to eventually be constructed and sold in that area. So it's going to have a phenomenal impact.
And actually, the Drogheda Port Access, the Northern Cross route, that was the project that I first heard of HISCo in that context. And I know the Taoiseach and the Housing Minister actually turned the sod only the last month or two. So you talked there about bringing the 2 larger developers in, who between them will be delivering 1,300 homes. But we know that the completion of this road actually facilitates somewhere in the region of maybe 5,000 homes. So how do you get 2 developers who are going to be developing 1,300 homes to foot the bill for infrastructure that's going to essentially be servicing 5,000. And, I'm asking this in a way that we want this to be attractive to developers. We want them to do this because then it actually speeds up the delivery of homes. But I'm just wondering, from a business model point of view, how do you make that work?
Yeah, great question. So ultimately, for the HISCo model to work, the developers that engage HISCo must have planning approval. Okay, so I have a finite number of units that we can work our figures on. Okay, so whereas the discussion started with 4 different developers, the other 2 were not ready on time and just had to drop off in terms of direct engagement with HISCo. But this is where the local authority comes in terms of the cooperation. So Louth County Council have put in a new development contribution scheme, which in summary states anybody paying HISCo is exempt from that portion of the levy. Anybody not engaged or paying HISCo must pay the levy to Louth County Council. So everybody is paying pretty much the same, but there's an acknowledgement that if everybody stood back, the road wouldn't happen. So in one sense, you have to applaud the developers that have got stuck in with HISCo and have helped us to prove the model, because this is our first and biggest one for an offsite project. But equally, the other developers in the area have been, doing their best to help us and move us on and assist us, because they can see where it could be a benefit to them. But that's where Louth County Council's cooperation was crucial, so that exactly the point you're making, that it's from a commercial perspective, it's seen as fair and equitable for everybody in that region. So, and to be fair to Louth County Council, they've spent in the region of in excess of 10 million bringing it to a shovel-ready state. So they're quite entitled to recoup some of their monies through other contributions as well. So that's how it worked in Louth. It'll be different in all the, no matter where I go in the country, it'll be slightly different. In a lot of the cases we're looking at, there are 3 or 4 developers, and that's all there is, and they're all ready, and they'll come in with me with HISCo and do the deal directly, and there won't be anybody outside benefiting, if you get me, So it's different, case by case basis,
I understand, and sorry, I know you touched on it there, that this is something specific with Louth County Council, but are you looking at that? Because look, I think it is important that there is an exemption from the development levy, because otherwise there's essentially a double payment, and I do think it's important then that those who haven't contributed actually continue to make that development levy. Through the use of HISCo, how are the local authorities then making their money if anybody who's working through HISCo is exempt from the development levy? Are you actually working with the local councils? Are you covering part of that development levy?
Well, we're not covering part of it. Okay, so it's ultimately the developer pays here, however it works, either to HISCo or to the local authority. So HISCo, to be fair, doesn't put any money in ourselves. We provide the loan funding to get it all working and get it underway. So, again, case by case basis. So in a lot of cases, the local authorities recognise with their piece of infrastructure, they may have to put a new development contribution in place to make sure it's fair and equitable. So to be fair, Louth County Council are groundbreaking in that perspective, that they've actually identified HISCo in the wording of the development contribution scheme. So that's unusual that they would mention an entity as such in terms of delivery of the piece of infrastructure. So that's groundbreaking from that perspective.
Is there a danger of local authorities losing income through this?
I don't think so. I think, in fairness to local authorities, their main objective is to deliver a piece of infrastructure. And ultimately in Louth, and this is what will happen throughout the country, is when HISCo has completed the construction of the piece of infrastructure, we'll be handing over responsibility to the local authority, and then they will take it in charge and move on with life as normal. It always will stand as a piece of infrastructure that it allows them to justify their own development contribution schemes, and they'll be taking in contributions into the future on the back of the piece of infrastructure being delivered. So I think that the local authorities are more focused on the fact that they couldn't deliver a piece of infrastructure, and now through this new model, they will deliver the piece of infrastructure. and life gets on in terms of development, and in the case of Drogheda, in terms of transport management as well, because it's crucial from a transport management perspective as well as residential development.
Yeah, look, to be honest, the Drogheda Port, the Access Northern Cross route was such an important piece of infrastructure to get in place. You know, again, with the intention of unlocking up to in the region of 5,000 homes. But we know that roads isn't the main infrastructure that's holding up delivery. I mean, over the last number of years, Irish Water has taken a little bit of a flogging from the industry. Is there anything happening in that respect?
Yeah, I've had numerous discussions with Irish Water at a very high level, because exactly that, we keep tripping across instances where it's the lack of a water main, the lack of capacity in the local sewage treatment plant, the lack of treatment itself, that could be the issue. So Irish Water, to be very fair, have come around to try and find ways to work with us, because, you know, again, if it's on their capital investment programme or a long way down their capital investment programme, they can see where HISCo might be able to come in and deliver something quicker. So we are working on a couple of pilots with them to see how we can deliver it and comply with their various procedures and processes, which, you know, and I can see clearly from my discussions with Irish Water, they are trying their damnedest to improve their systems and processes. I can see that clearly, and I know they come in for a lot of flack, but they're certainly trying to be more proactive in terms of finding ways to deliver infrastructure quicker and more efficiently. So they can see that HISCo could possibly be one of those methods to deliver. And so we are looking at a couple of pilots at the moment throughout the country, so that, you know, again, as I say, they're very particular, and for good reason, very particular about their standards and their specifications, and they need to be very protective of that in terms of the future of those assets. But I think we certainly can find ways to work with them, and if we can crack the first couple of pilots, we can roll that out in several locations throughout the country. And even now, it's slightly different, but even in Drogheda, we are delivering a water main for them in the new road. Now, that's on their capital investment programme, so they're paying for that directly to HISCo. But it shows you how we can collaborate as well in terms of signing an agreement between us where we're delivering the water main for them and they're paying it for us. So we've got to know each other very much so through the Drogheda project.
Very good. Niall, you know, anybody who is listening to not just property and construction commentary, but quite frankly, kind of state of the nation as such, we know that so many of our problems, whether it's across the rental market, the current controversy over the evictions ban, everything is coming back to a chronic undersupply of homes. And I know we work a lot on the MMC side through MMC Ireland in terms of ramping up modern methods of construction and other things that will ramp up the delivery of homes. But obviously, the Housing Infrastructure Services Company is doing something very practical to unlock land for residential development. Can you give a sight into your pipeline of projects over kind of the next 24 months?
Yeah, I can't agree anymore. I mean, we can have all the debates and discussions and everything about the various industry and the problems and the blockages and planning and infrastructure, but unless we produce supply, we're not going to solve the hunger for either rental accommodation or for purchase. Either or, it needs supply at the end of the day. So in terms of our supply line, yeah, we're looking at projects all over the country at the moment. I mean, number one objective for me was to get out there and speak with every single management team in the local authorities, all the as many as possible of the development community, to get inside people's heads in terms of what HISCo can deliver. That's bringing through numerous projects to us at the moment, which we're examining. And you see, okay, the frustrating bit for us and for the whole country is that at the end of the day, we are at the mercy of statutory consents. And, you know, there's a planning approval required for the piece of infrastructure, or Part 8 approval, or an ordinary planning application approval required. In a number of cases, there will be compulsory purchase orders required in terms of delivery of the piece of infrastructure, and that can be a road or it can be the extension of a local treatment plant. And therefore that's, you know, frustratingly slow sometimes, but we'll get there. And then at least I think what's very important message for me to deliver is that, you know, if an authority doesn't see the potential for something to be funded, they probably don't have the energy or the resources to put into getting those early steps in place. Okay, but when they see that there is something like HISCo there, as well as state funding. State funding might still come your way. But now that HISCo is very definitely there, it gives them the impetus to get on with the Part 8s and the CPOs. So if I was to put a figure on it, I suppose I've counted up recently, what the potential is. At the moment, we have projects which would come to about 50,000 units if we were to deliver them all tomorrow morning as such, if you get me. So, but they will happen piecemeal over the next few years. And we're trying to speed them up as much as possible, push and pull and drag where we have to in terms of getting them to construction point. But certainly there are at least up to 50,000 units that are held up in one shape or form by the non-delivery of some piece of infrastructure around the country.
That's a huge figure looking at the crisis we're at the moment. The annual demand, I know the Taoiseach recently suggested that it's more than 250,000 new homes needed. And we know the construction industry can only do what it can do. It can only deliver what it can deliver. It's very clear to me there is still an education piece that needs to happen to take the chokeholds out of the system. In terms of taking these blocks out of the system, where are the points of resistance that you're coming up against?
Well, look, I don't want to be another one harping on about planning, but to be honest about it, it is planning. So, first and foremost, it's in terms of getting decisions through on Bord Pleanála much quicker. I know they're ramping up in terms of their own resources, and they'll get there. But we certainly have to look at the whole judicial review process. And okay, people are entitled to have they're entitled to object to a particular scheme and to take that through the courts if they see necessary. But what we can't see is a definite timeline in the courts. I mean, that's really the frustration. I listen to developers every day. I'd say, top of my head, there's about 6 of our schemes held up because of judicial reviews. So we can't go anywhere with them because nobody can tell you what the future of them is. Will they get through? Will they not get through? But the really frustrating thing is nobody can say when they'll have a decision. And I think that piece needs to be tackled quite quickly, because in business, no matter what you're doing, you need some certainty, some level of certainty. And if you're sitting on 100, 200, 300, 400 units, which you've already pumped, in some cases, 300,000 or 400,000 into putting that application together, and not knowing when you're actually going to have a decision, be it negative or positive, I think that really needs to be tackled. But overall, from my perspective, it is the planning system that is holding things up at the moment. And I'm not the first to say that, and I won't be the last, but that really needs an overhaul. I'll be straight about it. I think that the new planning development bill is only tinkering around the edges as such. I don't think it's tackling really head on what the blockages are in the system. And I think it needs to look at trimming down the length of time planning approvals need. I'm not saying throw planning out. We have to have good planning. There's no doubt in my mind we need good planning, but I don't think the system needs to be, take as long to deliver decisions. And look, take that from a higher economic perspective, and we can all see what various entities considering investing in this country are saying. My God, what a wonderful country to develop in. Everything looks right from an economic perspective. Where are my employees going to live? And that's the important thing. And can they afford to live in the places I want to develop the jobs in? So this is getting crucial now. And to my mind, I think it has to be looked upon as an emergency. We've been brilliant in terms of dealing with emergencies over the last 4 or 5 years, with everything that's been thrown at us on the world stage. And I think this one just needs to be grasped the same as an emergency, and maybe even on a temporary basis, we deal with that and use the legislation that's at our hands in terms of getting planning approvals through.
The changes to the planning bill that you're referring to there, I know we have been promised a radical overhaul of the system. You don't think that's what's on the cards?
I'm saying this, and I have to respect the fact that we're still in a kind of a consultative process in terms of that there's still discussions ongoing. But I think that the industry is being very clear in delivering the message that it's not radical enough. And yes, there'll be improvements, but at the end of the day, it isn't radical enough. And look, what does radical look like? I mean, people just need to have a very finite planning system that we know the number of months it will take to get through. Fine, we'll answer the question, delivering the drawings, make sure everything looks right from a planning perspective and comply with the county development plans and the local area plans. But we need a finite timeline. This thing where we either end up in a Bord Pleanála on a never-ending basis, or in the courts waiting for a decision, they're the places that we need to tackle and put some certainty back into the system.
Thank you, Niall. You know, generally, I generally we like to finish on an answer, but I think on this occasion we are going to have to finish on a question. I think you posed a very interesting one there. What does radical change look like in the context of Ireland's planning regime? And I think that that's probably a longer conversation for another day, and we're a bit away from that. But thank you so much for being so generous with your time today. That was Niall Morrissey, CEO of the Housing Infrastructure Services Company, or HISCo. Our thanks to the show producer, Carol Tallon, and to the podcast production team at Hear Me Roar Media. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the podcast and check out all of the other real estate and construction shows on iPropertyRadio. Before we go, we'd like to give a special thanks to our sponsor, Place Engage. Using immersive technologies, Place Engage offers a data-driven platform for more successful public consultation and community engagement for your next development project. So thank you, Place Engage, for supporting our podcast and making these conversations possible. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch up with you on the next episode of Breaking Ground on iProperty Radio.